Hey drillers, I hope you're out there studying. I thought I would do a very brief video on the Vice-Presidency because I kind of rushed through it today in class a little bit. I wanted to remind you that there are really only two constitutional duties of the Vice Presidential office. Duty number one, of course, is to preside over the Senate and break ties. Duty number two is to count the electoral votes every 2 years. Every 4 years. So really only two constitutional duties of the Vice President. The Vice Presidency has changed very much. In the 19th century, it was a very inconsequential office. It was given away to people who've been in politics for 20, 30, 40 years as a kind of bon voyage, a kind of golden parachute into their retirement. In fact, we had 6 vice presidents die in office in the 19th century because of the way they looked at the office. However, with the advent of the Cold War, we began to take the Vice Presidency much more seriously. And the reason for that, of course, is that you needed somebody who could serve in the office, who had the capacity and the wisdom and the judgment and the experience to be president himself. In fact, many vice presidents have become president, or at least got their party's nomination. Gore was a vice president. We all know George H.W. Bush was a vice president. Ford was a vice president. Nixon was a vice president. And the list goes on and on. And of course, nowadays, we look at the vice presidency as trying to be somebody who helps the president get elected. So oftentimes we try and pick somebody who has a strength that we ourselves as the candidate perhaps don't have. Barack Obama was young and not he was very inexperienced in foreign policy, so he picked Joe Biden, who was older and had experience in foreign policy, very much the same reason why Dick Cheney was chosen as a vice presidential candidate for George W. Bush. Now, what about the 25th Amendment? The 25th Amendment is very important because it says what the Constitution does not say. The Constitution does not say anywhere in the original Constitution that if something happens to the president, that the vice president assumes the office. So when Harrison died, it was not at all clear that Tyler should just step up and become president. In fact, there was probably more historical evidence for the idea that the Electoral College should meet again and pick a new president. And yet Tyler did step up, he did become president. That set the precedent for Johnson replacing Lincoln, for Teddy Roosevelt replacing McKinley, and finally in the 25th Amendment it said once and for all, if the president can no longer be president, the vice president assumes the office. Now, it also says, of course, that if there's an opening for the vice presidency, like there was with Spiro Agnew stepping down in the early 1970s, then the president can get a new vice president by nominating one, and it has to be confirmed by both chambers of Congress, the House and the Senate. And then finally, there is a way to remove a sitting president who is perhaps under duress or who can't serve who doesn't have the capacity anymore, and that is if the vice president and a majority of the cabinet secretaries decide that the president should no longer be in office, he is then removed. Now, it gets a little more complicated. If the president doesn't agree with what the cabinet and the secretary, what the cabinet and the vice president have said, they can actually take their case to the Congress, and the Congress has to decide it. It gets very messy. You don't need to know that much complication. But just know that the 25th Amendment is all about vice presidential succession. Good luck tomorrow.